Hello everybody, how are you today? Today's going to be a little bit different of a video. I'm going to do a voiceover this time. I haven't done that yet. And I thought I would take you through my canning process and what I do in order for that to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to can barbecue sauce, which you can find in a video in the iCard above. And we had finished that, so now it's time to can it. So what I'm doing here is I am filling up the sink, going through and checking the jars to make sure that there's no cracks, any chips, anything like that that would harm in the processing, because the last thing you want to do is waste all the product when you could have actually solved it by making sure that you had no cracks or chips in the jars. So what I do is I make sure to rinse each one of them. I also check the threads as I rinse them, and this allows me to do that inspection and make sure that they've been cleaned off, because after a time, even though my jars are all usually boxed up, they get dust on them, or whatever critters might have gotten into them. That way they're clean. I also wash all my rings and lids, not only because of what may get on them from my house, like I said, but if they're new ones, you don't know if they've been sterilized, which I have to assume that they've not been sterilized. And you don't know who's touched them or what's been on them. So even the new ones, I do wash those. Warm soapy water, same as I do with the jars. And then I also do the rings too, make sure that they're all clean. And then I also go through and I clean all of my utensils as well. A side note, I wash my stock pot that I'm going to cook the product in, and then I also wash my canner. I do this every time prior to use, just so I make sure that they're cleaned as well. And I think it's a really good idea and a good practice to get into. Another thing to do while you're looking at your rings and you're washing those as well is to make sure that you don't have any rust on the rings, any food particles, things like that you may have missed in the time before. So I just go through and I make sure they're all cleaned and make sure there's no soap on them or anything, and then I try to get them all laid out and prepped so that I can use them when I'm ready to can. Unfortunately, sometimes while you're doing this, you have a lid that gets stuck down at the bottom of the drain, and I just forgot to make sure that didn't happen. I also add 1 cup of white vinegar, and this helps prevent the clouding or deposits on my jars when they're done processing. And that's just because we have hard water where we're at. Then I do the same thing for a saucepan that will have my lids, rings in it, and I add about 1/4 cup of vinegar for the same as the canner, or same reason as the canner. And then what I do is I lay out a towel to place the processed jars when I remove them from the canner. I want to make sure that there is a divider in between the jar being sat on the counter and the counter itself. That way that there's no chance of it cracking or breaking due to the change in the surface temperature. I just want to throw out a little bit of a disclaimer. I know that in new practices you don't have to warm up your lids, but I still do it and most of what I can is processed for more than 10 minutes, but it's still a hard process that I've learned that I am having a hard time getting through. So I still go ahead and warm up my lids and rings, and I also pre-sterilize my jars. So, and the other thing that helps with the jars is that it brings them up to a close temperature to what the food's going to be at, so there's not a shock problem with the jars and having them shatter. Another item I need to state here too is make sure that when you're doing a hot pack system, which is what I'm doing, I'm using hot jars, hot product in hot water. Ladle the barbecue sauce into the jars. I'm filling the jars to a 1-inch headspace, and for my elevation I will process these for 40 minutes. And that's partly because this barbecue sauce is a little thicker than most are. So once I get these jars filled up, I make sure that they're at the 1-inch headspace, and then I go through and debubble each one. You want to make sure that you do that. And then what I do is I go through and I will use a paper towel, wipe each rim. And I'm a little different than some people, or not maybe some, but I know I notice it. I always go through and do a double wipe, and I make sure that the napkin is clean before I move on to the next one. That way I can ensure that there's no issue with the process, and when those lids need to seal, they can do them as they need to. And I also double check the threads as well. Now I'm placing the jars into the canner, and as I put one in, I pull an empty one out, and that way I'm ready for the next setup. And then I'll go through and repeat the same process as I did before. And just another little side note, make sure that when you have put your lids on and your rings, after you've debubbled in your jar lids down, you're only doing fingertip height. Don't do any more, because you will not allow it to breathe as it needs to in the processing. And now the jars are all in place, and I can put the lid on. I'm double checking the water level to make sure it's at least 2 inches or more. Check for a rolling boil. Set my timer for 40 minutes processing time. And once that's done, I take the lid off, and then I set for 5 minutes. And once that 5 minutes is done, I can pull the jars out, and they are done. And again, this is all sped up, but here you can see the finished product. I can tell you every one of the jars did seal, and that's just the way this process goes for me and how I do it. So again, if you like the content and you want to see more videos, please come back, like, share, subscribe, and we'd love to see y'all back here again. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.